There was a time when reaching space was a question, not a fact.
Welcome. It's a pleasure to have you with us for this episode of the Language Year Comprehensible Input for Learners.
And we remember today how that question about reaching space began to slowly sort of turn into reality.
It really started with Sputnik, didn't it? Back in 1957.
Yeah, that little satellite launched by the Soviet Union, it did more than just orbit. It changed everything down here almost.
Absolutely. It shifted the whole nation's focus, towards the stars.
And pretty quickly, too.
Very quickly. NASA, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, was officially created, October 1st, 1958?
Right. And it wasn't entirely from scratch, was it? It took over from NACA.
Exactly. NACA had been studying flight for ages. NASA just sort of absorbed its people, its facilities, thousands of them.
And the goal was clear from the start.
Peaceful exploration. Expanding what we knew. That was the core idea.
So, okay, NASA exists. But the big question then was, can people actually do this? Survive space?
That's where Project Mercury came in. To answer exactly that, can humans handle it?
And Alan Shepard gave us the first answer. May 61. First American in space.
A brief flight, but crucial. Then, February 62, John Glenn.
Friendship 7. Orbiting the Earth. That felt like a bigger step somehow.
It was. It proved we could stay up there, but Mercury was just step one, really.
So what came next? Learning how to actually work in space.
Precisely. That was Project Gemini. It was all about developing the skills needed for more complex missions.
Like spacewalks.
Exactly. Ed White, 1965, floating outside the capsule, first American to do it, and also things like meeting up with other spacecraft in orbit.
Rendezvous. Docking practice. Skills you'd absolutely need for the moon.
The moon, that massive goal set by Kennedy. But achieving it, it came at a terrible cost early on.
You mean Apollo 1, January 1967?
Yes, that fire during a simple ground test.
Gus Grissom, Ed White, Roger Chaffee. Lost.
It was devastating, but it forced a really hard look at everything.
What did they find? What went wrong?
Several critical things. The materials inside were too flammable, the atmosphere was pure oxygen, highly combustible, and crucially, the hatch opened inward. They couldn't get out.
So changes had to be made. Fundamental changes.
Immediate ones. New materials, a different air mix in the cabin, and a hatch that could open outwards quickly. Safety became paramount after that. It was a painful lesson, but vital.
And that hard lesson paved the way for success.
July 1969, Apollo 11, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin walk on the moon.
An incredible moment. And more landings followed.
6 more, yeah, until the early 70s. But even with that success, things started to shift.
Budgets changed. Priorities.
Seems so. The last few planned Apollo missions, they just never flew. But the story didn't end there. It just changed direction.
How so?
It moved from intense competition towards, cooperation.
Like the Apollo-Soyuz mission, 1975.
Exactly. American and Soviet spacecraft docking in orbit. A handshake really high above the Earth, a symbol of a new era.
And then came a different kind of vehicle altogether.
The space shuttle. Starting in 1981, reusable. Designed to carry astronauts and cargo to orbit regularly, it really changed access to space.
Deployed Hubble, didn't it, among other things?
Yes, launched the Hubble Space Telescope, a game changer for astronomy. But the shuttle era also brought profound reminders of the risks.
Challenger, January 1986.
A cold morning. The shuttle broke apart just after launch. 7 astronauts lost, including Krista McAuliffe, the teacher.
What happened there?
A seal, an O-ring on one of the rocket boosters, failed in the cold. It let hot gas escape. Later, it came out that engineers had warned about the risk in cold weather.
Warnings ignored.
Tragically, yes. And then, years later, another loss.
Columbia, February 2003. On re-entry.
Yes. Damage from a piece of foam insulation that hit the wing during launch. It seemed minor at the time, but it compromised the heat shield. 7 more astronauts lost.
The investigation there, what did it reveal?
It showed that sometimes even known risks can become accepted, normalized over time. Complacency can creep in.
So these tragedies, as awful as they were, forced more changes.
Profound ones. In design, testing, management culture. A much stronger focus on safety, on listening to every concern.
And out of all this long history of triumph and tragedy, what emerged?
A more collaborative spirit, I think. Look at the International Space Station.
Right. Continuously occupied since, November 2000. Built by many countries.
A true international partnership. A permanent home in orbit. And now we also see NASA working with private companies.
For getting cargo and even astronauts to the station.
Exactly. It lets NASA focus its own resources on pushing further out.
Which brings us to Artemis.
Yes. The plan to go back to the moon, to the South Pole this time, including the first woman, the first person of color.
And that's seen as a stepping stone.
Towards Mars. That's the long-term vision, building on everything learned and doing it collaboratively, internationally, and with commercial partners.
The boy's still there. The stars are brighter now. The sky has turned to memory.
Thank you for being with us. If, in hearing these words, you felt that space isn't just up there, but in here too, then we're glad. Maybe now you'll look something up. Maybe you'll step outside. Or maybe you'll just let a question echo a little longer. We'll see you next time on The Language Year. Until then,